Hello everybody, this is Samantha with Not Too Shabby Macrame, and today we are setting out our supplies to make a mini macrame hanger for a 2-inch terracotta pot. If you're in a class, the materials are going to be shared, but you will need the cord cut to length into 4 strips, scissors to do that, and then eventually you will need tape for this product, and the pot and the optional succulent that will fit into that. So with that, let's get started. Here is the mini macrame hanger that we will be making in today's class. You can kind of see how we have that loop at the top, the macrame basket that we make, and then finishing it at the very bottom. Shown here is a 3-inch pot. These hangers work really well with a 2-inch pot or similar. I don't have a plant in it right now, but you can do a real plant, a fake plant. Both work really well in this macrame mini hanger. So you should have your 4 cords here cut to length. And we are going to take those 4 cords and simply loop them in half right away, finding that middle point. This is going to be the top of our hanger that we will loop it there. So once you find that middle point, we are going to tie a simple knot around all those cords, pushing those loops through and then tightening it from both the top and the bottom, making sure that that loop is a decent size to hang your product from. Once you have that loop created, we are going to put our hanger vertical just like so and push that loop to the top of our workspace, taking our tape and just setting that down so that we can work down from the rest of the hanger. We will then have 8 cords that we'll be working with here. And if you look at the top where they come out of that knot, some cords lie next to each other better than others. So make sure that they're kind of laid out nicely, because then when we come down here to make the basket, we don't want to be tying knots that don't exactly go together. We want those strings laid out fairly nice, kind of in a row like this. And we're going to start over on that left-hand side with the 2 outermost cords. And we're going to measure roughly a hand's length down, tying that same knot up here with those outermost 2 cords. Again, you want to tighten from the top and the bottom, kind of measuring that hand as you go. It doesn't need to be super tight, but just so we measure from the top and the bottom. We are now going to repeat that same knot 3 more times with the remaining 6 cords, again, seeing how they pair nicely. And we're going to work from left to right. So starting with those cords number 3 and 4, we're going to tie that knot, making sure we're not too quick to tighten, because we want it to line up with that first knot when we used cords 1 and 2. So they should go in a line across from each other, tightening slowly from the top and the bottom. Then once you put them next to each other, they should be just like that. Moving on to your next 2 cords, tying that knot, tightening from the top and the bottom, moving your cord accordingly so that it lines up with those other 2 knots. Finally, working with cords 7 and 8, tying that same knot, tightening it slowly so that it lines up, and we have a group of those 4 knots. We are now going to be making the basket portion of that macrame hanger here where the planter is going to sit in. So we have our 4 groups of 2 cords, and we're going to start with the leftmost 2. So what we're going to do is take cords 2 and 3, connecting and tying that knot, same as before. This time about 2 fingers down from those top 2 knots. Again, tightening from the top and the bottom so that it kind of makes a triangle here. So we're going to leave this leftmost one for now. We're going to come back to that one in a little bit. So to this, we're going to slide that 3rd knot from before back into our pattern here. We're once again going to take that innermost cord between knots 2 and 3, and we're going to tie that basic knot about 2 fingers down and lining up with that new set of knots that we just created. Starting to kind of make that zigzag pattern with the knots. Still leaving this leftmost cord open. We once again kind of drag in that 4th pair from before, taking that innermost cord, tying that knot, again lining it up with the first 2, tightening it nice and slow, to where we should now have 4 knots on top and 3 knots on the bottom, kind of making that zigzag shape. This should leave you with 2 strings on the outside here. Once we're at this point, we bring those up to finish that basket and connecting the original cord 1 and the original cord 8. Tying that knot and lining it up with the bottom 3 knots so that once we kind of open it up and play with it a little bit, we should see it's a nice little basket shape here. Once we have those 8 knots created, it's a good time to kind of check with your little 2-inch terracotta pot here how that settles in there, and if we need to go back and adjust those knots, make the gaps a little bit bigger, make them a little bit smaller, make them more in line. This pot here is a 3-inch pot, so it's a little bulky for these measurements, but you get the idea of how it kind of sits in there. Those top set of knots are on the top of the pot, those bottom sets of knots are resting. Once we have those knots arranged comfortably around your terracotta pot, we're going to finish this off, or start the process of finishing it off. So you can kind of see where I have my fingers pinched. That's going to be where I want the bottom of my basket to be able to settle. So once you've kind of found that space, we're going to remove the terracotta pot, and just like the knot that we made at the very top of our project, we're going to take all 8 of those cords and wrap them around, pulling all the way through. And again, before this gets too tight, you can slip that terracotta pot in and adjust your knot as needed. You most likely went too far up, so it really needs to come down with that bottommost knot. And using that pot to set. So now that we're at the end of our project, we have a few options to choose how we want to end our tassels. Make sure you listen up to all of the options, because once you go back on some of them, there's really no turning around at that point. So you can leave it exactly as is with those twists in there and the uneven lengths. If you don't care for that look, what you can do is simply cut it straight across the shortest remaining tassel. Next, and kind of the point of no return would be taking each of those individual 8 cords and untwisting and pulling them apart so that you give it lots of character, kind of fray them out, really untwisting and pulling apart to kind of give it that shaggy. And then that very last option after you've kind of frazzled it out is to just cut it straight across. So kind of giving it that frazzled look, but a little more blunt at the bottom. So there we have our completed mini macrame plant hanger with a terracotta pot. You can for sure keep that fake succulent in there, looking super cute. Real plants also can go in these terracotta pots. Just keep in mind that they cannot be watered in the hanger. You need to take the potted plant out of the hanger, water it, let it completely drip dry so that nothing's coming out of the bottom there before you place it back into your macrame hanger. But there you go. Thank you so much for participating, and I hope you love your mini macrame hanger.